This is the Mike LiPetri Show.
I could hear you loud.
I know, I'm always loud. That's my problem.
Me
right?
too. People always say.
That's very true. You know what? You have a great voice that projects and resonates with people that allows you to effectuate change.
Yes,
right?
I mean, listen, if God gave you a good voice, use it.
Yeah, touche. Amen to that. So we have today Adrienne Esposito, Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. What do you think about this studio, Adrienne?
I actually like this studio,
Right?
Mike. I'm a little jealous.
Listen, with me, you're gonna do it right. You're gonna have that high quality always, and that's why we
There
have
you go.
high quality guests as well.
That's right, Mike.
I was so excited to talk to you because we've had so much back and forth over the years with talking about many issues that were important, specifically when I was in the state assembly. And then even before that, what many people don't know, is when I worked for Citizens Campaign for the Environment when I was right out of high school as a canvasser.
That's right. We helped shape your young mind to become environmentally conscious.
That's right. That's right. And then I have to say, I was so grateful for that experience because being able to talk to residents, knowing what being boots on the ground, I think that gave me such strength with the grassroots operation, which is what Citizens Campaign does and flourishes each and every day.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to talk to people no matter what career you end up doing in life, but you have to have good communication skills to talk to people, to listen to them, but also to respond to them. And I think that's what grassroots work teaches people to do, to really not be afraid, get out there in a community, and really talk with people. I get asked all the time, how do you have your finger on the pulse of the public? And I say, we don't have our finger on the pulse of the public. We're walking in the pulse of the public, our whole bodies. And I think there's a lot to be said for that about how CCE has been built on understanding public need.
Citizens Campaign for the Environment has been around since 1985.
Yes, I don't know how that happened, but
time,
yes.
Time flies when you're making change, right?
Time flies when you're making change and you're having fun, but it has been quite a journey. We started out as a tiny little group in my living room in a tiny apartment, and here we are today in the year 2023. We have 120,000 members. We have offices throughout the state of New York, and honestly, we've become an environmental and public health protection force in the state of New York.
I think that's absolutely amazing. I mean, when I think of Citizens Campaign for the Environment, I think of Adrienne Esposito. That's the truth with that. So I think that speaks volumes to your efforts over the decades to making change.
Thank you, but I really have to. We have a great team of people. We really do. We have an office in Buffalo and in Syracuse and a couple folks on Long Island, and everybody really works together. And the funny thing is that we have a saying, we joke around, we don't hire people, we seem to just adopt them because they're there 20 years, 15 years, 25 years. They kind of grow up working for our organization, but that is really great because they have such a great institutional memory and experience and knowledge base that they bring to the campaigns and the work.
I think that's excellent. And some of the work and efforts you've done over the years, you've really seen that change on Long Island for the better, to preserve our environment. And specifically, I really was excited to talk to you about a few things, whether it be the renewable energy projects, wind. I know that's your baby right now, and it's just building on Long Island. We could talk about that. Solar, electric. I want to just kind of branch into about nuclear. How come, why wouldn't we also want to include nuclear in the diversity of energy? And then maybe we could touch on electric vehicles, raw materials usage, and then even going into our water quality, because as you know, that's something that's near and dear to my heart, is that water quality. So with the wind energy projects now, what's can you for the listeners and viewers about, they have no idea what's going on. What we know is oil and gas has been a staple in Long Island. Now we're bringing in these projects. What's going on with that wind projects?
No, it's a great question. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. I mean, we have right now on Long Island 5 different offshore wind farms that are moving through the regulatory process. Each of them are at a different stage of the regulatory process, but they are moving. So we have 2 off of Long Beach. One is called Empire Wind 1. The other one is called Empire Wind 2. Mm-hmm. One of those is going to connect directly to Nassau County through the Barrett power plant right around there. And another one is going to go and up the Gowanus Canal and connect to Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Then we have another large one called the Beacon Wind Farm. That's an Equinor wind farm. That is going to actually have a connection cable that goes around Long Island through the middle of Long Island Sound, and it's going to connect to Astoria, Queens.
Right.
Then we have another one called Sunrise Wind Farm that will connect right in the town of Brookhaven and will serve the county of Suffolk. And then we have a smaller one out on the East End that will connect into the town of East Hampton. So we have 5 of them. All of this clean energy will be producing enough electricity for probably over 1 million homes. And that's a great thing. 2 will be connecting into the New York City market. 3 of them will be connecting right into Long Island. Why is it important to do both? Well, I'm glad you asked, Mike. One reason is that we have to get renewables into New York City to really fight climate change and reach our renewable energy goals that we have set forth in New York State with the climate protection law. Mm-hmm. And right now, New York it's hot. You know, how are you going to build a wind farm in the middle of New York City? You're not, because there's no space. So we need to have some of the offshore wind power connect into the city. The city right now is 85% fossil fuels. So to replace that, we need to think outside of the box with offshore wind. There's also another power line that's going to come down from Quebec, connect to the New York City grid. That'll be about 1,200 megawatts. That's going to be hydropower.
Excellent.
So those are the wind farms, but
but with those wind farms, I just want to touch on that. You said a million homes. Is that per day, per year? How often would that be powering?
Anytime the wind's blowing, which is all the time. Sometimes people say, well, what happens when the wind doesn't blow?
Yeah, and isn't that a reasonable question, though? Because many people I've spoken to, they're wondering, why do we just have to have one or the other? Why can't we have a diversity where maybe those carbon fuels, such as oil and gas, you just said 75%, we have that decrease to, say, 20, 30%, but they're still involved in many of our day-to-day basis. And that's what some people, they're concerned about, is this replacing completely or is it supplementing?
Well, it's a good question. It really is. It's right now we're having a transition. Will we be 100% renewable? That's the goal. That's going to take time. It's going to take updates to the technology. We need to, at the same time, we're doing wind, to advance solar, right, to have these battery backup storage units, and to do other things. We're actually not even that great yet on energy conservation. So you're right. It's going to be many pieces to the puzzle. Wind is one of them.
Absolutely.
It's not all of them. So it's a very good question. And look, you asked the question, does the wind always blow? Everyone should keep in mind that these offshore wind farms are going to be between 15 and 50 miles offshore.
Right.
And they are huge. They're tall.
Yeah, they're enormous.
Let's not sugarcoat it. So we've done the wind studies, and they are most productive when the wind is 18 miles or more. And the wind is 18 miles per hour or more offshore in those areas.
Right.
So if the wind stops blowing across the ocean more than 3 or 4 days in a row, it means the earth has stopped spinning. So we'll have bigger problems than worrying about the wind farms, if that's the case.
These wind farms are so far off the island where it's just consistently blowing the wind, correct? That's the point. So many people, right off the bat, you're going to know that it's in an area where it's consistently blowing the wind. And it's also for those that are concerned about eyesores. How this is so far off where I remember even in the clearest day, you can barely see these babies, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, you might, honestly though, the one, Empire Wind 2, which is the one that'll be connecting it'll go through Island Park.
Yes.
It's 15 miles. It starts at 15 miles and then it goes back 16, 17, 18, 25 miles. But you might be able to see something on the horizon on a clear day at the beach. You might be able to see something.
Right.
If you can see over the cargo ships that are lined up going into New York City port, I mean, it's really been crazy. I don't know if you've been down by Jones Beach, but there's a line of cargo ships ever since COVID. But The other ones, 35 miles, 50 miles out, you cannot see that far out in the ocean. If you can, you have magical powers.
God bless you.
God
You're a bald
bless
eagle.
You. That's right. That's
Yeah, you're a
eagle.
bald eagle just looking at that direction.
I'll tell you right now, no one over 40 is going to be able to see out that far.
Well, I think that's what's so fascinating in terms of where they're stationed, how frequently they'll be emitting this energy. And also I was curious about with the connection, the actual cable connections into the grid, and how that will also work through the communities. Will that be at all with the connections when they do the construction at all? Will that be a problem for the surrounding neighborhoods? How's that going to operate?
You know, it's really funny because the most opposition I hear is people like, I don't want a cable. And I'm thinking, you already have a myriad of cables. And I'm not even exaggerating. We have telecommunication cables. Mm-hmm. We already have energy cables. We have all sorts of cable infrastructure that's underneath the ocean, underneath the bays, that comes up, through our streets. That's how we have different technologies. And we have electric, and we have heat, water. So this would be one more cable. These are not big cables. I was at a community meeting in Long Beach, where people were asking the wind company about the cable, and the guy stood up and said, I don't know if you realize, but the cable is only anywhere between 8 and 12 inches in circumference. And all of a sudden, people went silent and said, oh,
right.
Is that all? So this is not a giant pipeline.
Correct. That's what the common belief is.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because
they're thinking these huge windmills, you got to have huge cables then connecting.
Not with the technology anymore. And I will tell you, the reason I feel so confident about this is I had the question too. What will the cable connection look like? Mm-hmm. Is it going to disturb the beach? Is it going to hurt a dune system? What will happen? So a couple of us took a trip out to Block Island, where we have 5 wind turbines, the only offshore wind farm in America. We have 5. And we looked to see the cable connection because it comes up on the beach there, goes under the dunes, and it comes up in the parking lot. You can't see it.
Right, see?
There's a trap door in the parking lot where you go down into the parking lot underground where it's set up. But you have no idea when you're on the beach or in the parking lot that there's any kind of a cable connection to anything going on there.
See, that's what's beautiful about technology and innovation, where that growth and allowing to ensure that this won't be a disruption, at least to the magnitude that people anticipate or suspect it would have, which is something I think is vital in terms of making sure these projects get done in a timely manner.
Absolutely. And I think the more people really learn about the technology in offshore wind, the better off we are. We are facing a lot of myths. And one thing that our organization, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, really is working to do is debunk those myths with facts and science. Mm-hmm. And, people still think that wind farms kill birds. Well, it's left over from 25 years ago when they put up some wind turbines in California. They didn't know what they were doing, frankly. They put them up in a field where the wind is good, but it was an open field where there were lots of raptors, things like eagles and hawks, feeding on rodents. And they made the wind turbine base in a lattice structure, so it looked like a perch.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So, you got the picture right away, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
So, the hawk would try to perch on the turbine to look at the field and look for rodents, and they would die.
They get guillotined.
Yes. They would die a very painful death, yes. But they don't do that anymore. We put them outside of bird migratory pathways. There is no longer a lattice designed for perching. It's now a sleek, what's called a monopole. Also, the turbine technology is very slow now. Those turbines turn slow, and birds can see them. So now there's all these infrared studies that look at the pathway of birds, and when they actually see the turbine, they fly around it. Just like they don't hit trees when they fly.
Right.
Sometimes they fly into cars, but I don't really understand that.
That's once in a blue moon.
But that's a car that's
crazy
moving.
Bird. Yeah.
But now the technology is so much better. Will they still kill some birds? Yes. There's some statistic, it's 1 or 2 per, whatever it is. But, we have to compare that to how many birds and how much wildlife damage is being done because of climate change. The biggest issue with birds right now are two things. One is loss of habitat because of development, and the second is shift of temperatures and food sources because of climate change. So if you really want to protect species, we have to fight climate change. I would never sit here and say to you or to the public that wind power is perfect. It's not perfect.
Of course not.
But we have to choose some form of electric generation that has the least impact to our environment. And now we are using, via fossil fuels, the one that has the greatest impact to our environment.
I think it's going to be a balance, however, with that lifestyle, and that's going to be keys. Now, that's what we were alluding to earlier, is going forward, making sure that we still have the same lifestyle expectations. Because don't forget, too, many of the heavy machinery, right, many of the large buildings, they're going to require having the fossil fuels. They're going to need that in order to expend, because we're just not there with our renewable energies in terms of being able to expend that level of output to produce our quality that we look for in terms of everyday lives. People take for granted. And I don't think people really understand energy as a whole in terms of how much output you need for a certain, whether it be a car, whether it be an elevator, whether it be a tractor, or just simple lights for your home. But how much is really being used, where it's coming from. Because another thing I wanted to ask you about is the grid. Would there be any concerns with the overuse of the grid if we rely strictly on electric and not these fossil fuels? My biggest concern is more brownouts and blackouts that would be occurring because we don't have that energy output needed, and we'd overload the grid and the power plants. What do you think about that? Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing a thing. You're spot on. We have to upgrade the grid.
Yeah.
So with all these renewable energies that will be coming online, grid upgrades are being done, but we have more to do. Look, there are challenges. This is not, a magic formula. We just build a wind farm and plug it in and everything works great.
Right.
Like I wish. I think we all wish that. But we have to improve our grid system. The technology is advancing every year. The technology is advancing. We started out, each turbine was going to be 1.8 megawatts. Now they're making 10 megawatts for each turbine, which means we're going to be using less and generate the same amount of power. But we have to do grid upgrades. We have to be able to store excess energy. So when the wind is blowing a lot, we can store it in battery backup units. When the wind is gentle and we're not producing as much, we can then use those battery backups so that we don't have brownouts and blackouts. There's all sorts of advances that we need to implement to ensure, as you call it, the lifestyle, but to also ensure our safety so we can use this form of energy in a way that's conducive to what we need.
And so now let's build off of that. Now, what I'm thinking about is, separate from wind energy and all, is using nuclear. Why can't we bring in nuclear energy to be a part of that hybrid approach where we have the solar, the wind, the hydro, oil, gas, nuclear? I mean, for my generation, we're looking at it and saying, this is the most cleanest form of energy. It should be, you could still get large power out of it, and yet we have governments, we have political figures, we have organizations that are opposed. Where's the opposition?
Well, there are some environmental groups that are supporting nuclear power. Not mine. I want to be very clear.
Okay.
We are not one of them. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I actually have a great deal of experience and knowledge about nuclear power and the waste. The waste lasts for 10,000 years. And to be honest with you, Mike, I don't feel at all that we should have the nerve, frankly, to produce our energy with a process that leaves so much toxic, and I don't just mean toxic, I mean dangerous, hazardous waste for thousands of years. I'll give you an example. Right now, Indian Point, which is located in Westchester County, is closing down. And so they have all of what's called spent fuel rods and fuel pools there that need to be remediated, and they need to figure out what to do with it. We have spent fuel rods across America sitting at nuclear power plants in fuel pools that we have no idea what to do with it. No idea at all about how to store it for 10,000 years. So what Indian Point is now saying, well, we have some water in our spent fuel pools. It contains a substance called tritium, which is H3O, but still highly radioactive. And we just want to dump it slowly in the Hudson River because the solution to pollution is dilution. That's what they're telling us. They also want to dump strontium-90, another highly radioactive and toxic substance, in the river. Tritium's half-life is 11.3 years. Strontium's half-life is, I think it's 60 years. Strontium-90 is the radioactive chemical that mimics calcium in the body.
Okay.
So if you're exposed to it, it's going to end up in your bones and in your teeth, and it will deteriorate, break, and make your bones and teeth brittle. You will get blood cancer, bone cancer, and die. I feel like that's a lot. I mean, let's compare that to anything generated by wind power. Oh, no, there isn't anything generated by wind power. So I guess for us, for our organization.
So it's that waste component.
It really is, Mike. That I can't.
I mean, it's critical, obviously.
I can't get past that.
I see what you're saying with that, and that's going to be, I'm very interested in the technology that will be generated as a result to figure out how to discard the hazardous waste or even recycle it. I'm very interested in, but nevertheless, there's still a huge issue with the regulatory process regardless.
Yes.
That makes setting up a nuclear plant virtually like impossible today. Where I think if you started, I think I was looking at some information. If you started today to start building it, I think by 2040 or 2050, like you'd be up and running.
That's
which
exactly right.
Which is insane. Which is like, I'm like looking at it, I was like, why would any person even want to remotely invest in that then?
No, I got to tell you. I mean, I was here. I'm going to give away my age, which I hate to do.
30,
but I was
32, 33.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
you and I are
32.
the same age. I get it.
But when Shoreham, and look, I remember people came out in droves. I mean, when there was a demonstration, it wasn't 12 people. It was 1,000 or
Yeah.
more. You know, there were people who set up camp outside of the facility for weeks on end. There were people who went on hunger strikes. It was a very emotional time. There was. I mean, and people climbed the fence, who got arrested. So, you know, I think when history looks at that and says, well, do we want to repeat that or do we want to move on to something else that leads us into the future where we don't leave a legacy of waste for the next generation, but we leave a legacy of clean water and clean air for the next generation. And that's what we're really working hard to do.
Well, let's dovetail off that with clean water because that's something that we're obsessed about and something that I wanted to talk more of specifically with Long Island. Obviously in the news, we just recently saw that DEC declared MacArthur Airport a Superfund site because the water beneath it is the ground soil is contaminated from PFOA, PFOS, correct?
Correct.
And then am I missing another chemical as well?
Well, actually, I think we are going to be hearing about a lot more chemicals.
That's the seminal problem.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, here's the problem, Long Island, right? Everything we do on the surface seeps down and contaminates the underground drinking water supply called an aquifer.
Right. And that's what we have to walk through. Picture being, for those viewers and listeners, it's a picture like a pool where the island you're living on top of it, but everything underneath is what you're drawing from. Unlike many other areas, we're so unique in that aspect as the island where we have our freshwater aquifer, and then we have the salt water that surrounds it, which is our ocean that we're used to. So, which is very unique. I find that fascinating, frankly, where how just science works, where you have a pool of fresh water that is just naturally bordered with salt water, which is fascinating to me. But I just wanted for viewers and listeners to understand that we're drawing. So everything we do up top trickles down beneath us, in which we're then drawing and consuming. And it's just, so this is something that is, for me, I'm frightened because I'm thinking about 2030, 2040, 2050 with our children and grandchildren. Where is the water going to be for long? What's going to be a situation for us? So like with this Superfund site, can you elaborate now on the next steps that we're going to have to do to protect that groundwater beneath it?
Yes, I think it's a good example because what's happening right now at MacArthur Airport is really symptomatic of what's happening across Long Island with toxic sites. So, and you know, I can't even blame MacArthur Airport. I just want to be clear on that because they have a firefighting training center there. So the firemen would go out and they would train them, which is a good thing, on how to put out fires. And they were using this fire foam that everybody used across America and the world. And it turns out the firefighting foam has PFOA, which is a very, now we know, we didn't know then, but now we know it's a highly toxic chemical. This chemical is associated with such health ailments as kidney cancer, testicular cancer, damage to the immune system, damage to the liver, low birth weight in children, developmental disorders in children. I mean, I could go on. And the more this chemical is studied, the worse it is. It's so toxic that New York State has a very tiny drinking water standard of 10 parts per trillion.
Well,
which is crazy.
Which is very strict.
It's very strict.
Very strict.
It's the strictest drinking water standard that I know of.
Right.
So the facility there did firefighting, but also, it's an airport. So there's been a couple of jet fuel spills and a couple of other things. So right now, the New York State DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, is in the process of doing what's called characterizing the plume, which means understanding how deep is it, how wide is it, how long is it, and what actually is in it. They've already found PFAS in 2 water supply wells, one southeast of the airport, the other southwest of the airport. I don't know if they've closed the wells or put on heavy-duty filters. I know they've addressed it, though, quickly. But, those chemicals need to be cleaned up out of the aquifer system, and the plume needs to be what's called remediated or cleaned up.
Now, in terms of the future, so this is just an isolated circumstance for the island, but now we have the rest of the we have 3 million people on this island. People are drawing water. We have tons of golf courses, tons of land that's just using water like crazy, where no one's thinking about the recharge. No one's thinking about how do we keep recycling water. And as a result of that, how I'm looking at it is eventually, just as if you drink water out of a bottle like we have here, eventually it's going to become empty. And then what? So that's why my thought process, we have to start now where we're thinking about how we replenish that water so that future generations can now keep drinking clean water that's not going to be contaminated. It's not going to be polluted with this PFOA, PFOS. And also, I wanted to ask your opinion about the saltwater intrusion that's occurring too, and how those two, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see those two as overlapping. That's the reason why everyone's looking at the gates and other artificial ways, when I look at it as just a natural way of solution, where if we replenish the aquifer, that in of itself will be nature's way of staving off that saltwater intrusion to the island. And I wanted to hear your thoughts and ideas of ways we can, if that's correct, how we can make that happen and materialize.
Okay, so 2 things for our listeners. One is in Suffolk County, we actually have a lot of open space, and that's great for the drinking water because that allows the rainwater to trickle through the areas like the Pine Barrens and open space and recharge and replenish that underground drinking water supply. In Nassau County, it's kind of a little different. We've paved over 90% of Nassau County.
Wow.
So there's less area for the rainwater to actually trickle down and replenish that underground drinking water supply. So in Nassau County, people don't really know this, but the DEC actually put caps on all of the different water districts on how much water they can withdraw because they're trying to keep the aquifer, at a level that's sustainable.
Right.
But your point is very well taken that we need to start recharging some of the water or reusing.
Right.
It's easier to reuse water. You can't really take polluted water and put it back in the aquifer. We don't want to do that.
Nope.
But you could reuse water, for instance, from our sewage treatment plants, treat it to a higher level, and then maybe use it on golf courses or use it for other purposes rather than using fresh, clean water and use that all over our lawns. That's kind of a waste of all that clean water.
So segregate where you're using the water that you're recycling. That'll be just used for general use as opposed to consumption water will be then the ones what you use for yourself, the clean water.
That's a system that we're going to have to look at, particularly for Nassau County. There are areas in Nassau County that are more vulnerable to it's called groundwater mining, where you're taking more water out of the system than the rain's replacing naturally. But the coastline areas such as Port Washington, Great Neck Peninsula, those areas there are actually, and on the North Fork too. I should not leave out the North Fork. They're really having some water quantity challenges as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about if we had, when everyone does construction, commercial construction, if during those times they construct whatever it might be, buildings or facilities, etc., the parking lots have to be permeable, porous parking lots from now on. No longer blacktop, no longer, like, why is that? Why do we even have the blacktop versus, say, just general, like a stones or something of the sort that could gravel? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Mike, I don't know why we still have these kinds of parking lots. I mean, this is easy, right? This is called, green infrastructure. Instead of paving over, the parking lot, you use permeable pavements.
Right.
Instead of, figuring out what to do with stormwater runoff, you put in a rain garden. It allows the stormwater to seep back down underground. It actually provides some natural filtration for it. There are plenty of easy things that are not expensive we could do to get groundwater recharged. Permeable pavements is an easy one. There's plenty of places that are, the Lindenhurst Library just redid their whole place using permeable pavements. They no longer have flooding in the parking lot.
Right.
It looks beautiful. And they've really taken out the challenge of having people go there, park, and have to jump over puddles or wade through every time there's a heavy rain.
Right, because everything is now saturated in as opposed to just pooling above.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of things we can do. It's happening slowly. I shouldn't say it's not happening at all. But rain gardens, we just worked with Northport. They just installed 3 rain gardens on Bluff Road, which will now stop the flooding from going into the road there, and it'll also clean the stormwater before it goes into Northport Harbor.
Excellent.
So it's really, and they came out really nice. Everybody loves them. But anyway, my point is that there's stormwater that can be rechanneled into the ground that will recharge and replenish the aquifer. That speaks to your question about, can't we help recharge? The answer is yes, we can. But we still have to practice good water conservation measures, particularly in Nassau County.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing those developments. And speaking of with the water quality in Nassau and Suffolk, I mean, we got to just talk about it just because it's happening. Ohio. Like, that is insane in terms of the contamination of water, air. I mean, from your knowledge and expertise of the past and seeing how the EPA has handled past problems, past tragedies like you're seeing. I mean, for me, just looking from 10,000 foot perspective, I'm seeing, if I'm a resident of Ohio, I am running right now because seeing that cataclysmic pollution and contamination would cause me grave concern in not only my water quality, but even just breathing the air. What do you think about this?
Vinyl chloride is a really dangerous substance. It's do not want to be breathing it. You do not want to be drinking it. And when I heard the EPA come out and say, and that was just a few days literally after the fire broke out, and they told residents the air's safe, the water's safe, just come on back. It really brought back for me the horror of the memory of the EPA getting up there a few days after 9/11, telling everyone in New York the air quality was fine, just come on back.
You're out of your mind. There's no way I'm coming back.
And I mean, I went cold at that point, knowing, I was like, my God, the air is not fine.
Right.
What is wrong with you? And of course, now we all know that the EPA lied and misinformed the public, put them at risk, and made some people sick.
Yep.
And look, I haven't seen any air tests go in Ohio, but I can tell you, vinyl chloride, if it's in the air and the water, that the public's at risk.
Absolutely. I mean, just for me, I'd look at this as just common sense. I mean, I get it with how the government wants to see it, and we're going to see what happens in the forthcoming weeks, how they're going to handle this. But I'm looking at this just as a side note where if I'm a resident, I mean, if this happens on Long Island, I mean, we're having a totally different response, frankly, because we're going to be demanding so much cleanup. We want the federal government in there ASAP jumping on it and making sure. And if you don't know, my attitude is if you don't know, then say at this time, we're figuring it out. take precaution. We're not sure if it is clean. It could be clean or it might not be. But at this point in time, it's better safe than sorry.
I actually couldn't agree with you more.
But people are so scared of just admitting that they don't know. It's okay to not know when things occur.
Listen, the government owes the public honesty and the truth.
Totally.
Not, it's okay because you don't want to make people upset. Listen, if the truth is upsetting, people will deal with it.
You have to be at your word and have integrity to represent the people in the public government, doing what's right. At the end of the day, the people will deal with it. People respect. I'd rather know and not like it than not know and you're playing me for a fool. Nobody wants to be played for a fool.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And I feel like, we're going to be finding out, I hope, a lot more in the weeks to come. But I really am fearful for what it is we will be finding out and what we will be hearing about the impact to health, the impact to water. I know it's in the creeks there and a river.
Yeah, the Ohio River. Look at how it's interconnected. I mean, that of itself, that's what my biggest concern is.
Soil, and it's just really concerning what's happening.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, once it gets into the air, it travels. It's not just limited to Ohio.
Yeah, and that's what people need to realize, the interconnection of waterways, of air travel, the direction it might go. I mean, it can that's what I'm most concerned about, and that's why as a nation, we always have to be cognizant of what's occurring. If you're on the East Coast, what's happening on the West Coast, East Coast, South, North, etc., because all of it overlaps in some way or another.
It's so true. I'll just give you an extreme example of that just because I find that interesting. You remember that when the tsunamis hit Japan?
Of course.
And a couple of their nuclear reactors went down?
Yes.
Well, and then they just went into the ocean, That's what happens because of the waste. And but I am on the citizen advisory committee for Brookhaven National Laboratory. And about a year or two after the Japan incident, they gave a presentation to the advisory committee about finding contamination in giant tuna off of the coast of America.
There you go.
Because they got it from their travels through the ocean and what happened in Japan with the meltdown of the power plants.
That's fascinating.
So
talk about how everything overlaps.
So it's all, you're exactly right. People don't realize the Earth is really one giant ecosystem, and it really is interconnected. And just because it's not here on Long Island or here in New York State doesn't mean it doesn't impact us in some way, whether that's a small way or a big way.
Totally. I'm very interested to see how this develops, and I definitely appreciate your thoughts on that, especially with the examples from the past and the present. Now, one last thing, just before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about electric vehicles. Just real quick, your thoughts about them, where we're going, the balance. I wanted to hear just a couple minutes in sense of what you think.
Look, I mean, we're all going to be driving electric vehicles in the future. Don't get mad at me, but I'm just saying. The reason I say that is there's a law in New York State, I don't know if everyone knows, that by the year 2035, only electric vehicles will be permitted to be sold in New York State. So there's going to be a transition for that too. The good news is, I will say, the technology is really amazing the way it's growing in leap and bounds. And I do not have an electric vehicle. I have a hybrid. But when I've been in electric vehicles that other people own, I mean, the pickup is amazing. It's so quiet and it's so smooth. It really is something. But the technology has to advance because still the travel time is, about whatever it is, 300 miles. And some of us travel more than that sometimes in a day. And
then doesn't it also fluctuate based on temperature? If it's too hot, too cold, that also impacts how long the charge can hold?
Yes. Yes, it's not a lot, but yes, absolutely.
And then what about also, my biggest concern is the raw materials. That is my biggest concern. We're pushing policy, both federally and state, that allows us to be beholden on raw materials that we don't have the bulk majority of as a country, specifically whether it be the lithium, cobalt, or chromium, etc. I mean, we don't have the output now to sustain a large volume of EV vehicles. So my concern is, for example, like obviously China and Russia, they have possession of cobalt, they have possession of the lithium. What was it? I think it was also...
It's the rare earth minerals.
All the rare earth minerals, zinc, copper, nickel, that's Russia, very big with it, top 3 producer. So I'm just concerned with where we are on a geopolitical level that now this policy could that make United States beholden to these other countries? Because if they possess the rare earth minerals, the raw earth minerals, then what? Like, how does that position us?
Like we're beholden now to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and other foreign nations for our fossil
Well, at the same
fuels?
time, we can still be. We had pipelines that got killed that we could have allowed us to draw for ourselves and become self-sufficient. But I 100% agree with you on that too. But my point is don't we want to create those policies where we're still allowing ourselves to become energy independent as a whole, whether it be through electric vehicles or through fossil fuels? Nevertheless, we don't ever want United States beholden to anybody else.
Of course not.
For our energy.
We definitely don't. But we live in a global economy. And, the computer that we all have in front of us, the cell phone that we all have in front of us, no one ever complains or asks where the lithium batteries came from.
I don't think they understand it.
Yeah.
70% of the world's cobalt is in the Congo. 70%.
But I have to say, the only time I ever hear about rare minerals is when people talk about offshore wind or electric vehicles. But we've been in this cycle of needing these rare earth minerals since we developed computers and since we've advanced the cell phone. So our technology right now is using them. Are we going to use them more with electric vehicles? Yes, you're correct. But we'll be less dependent on fossil fuels that we're importing or, other materials that we're importing, not just fossil fuels, but oil, coal, natural gas. Right. So, we live in a global society. We live in a global geopolitical world. So everything that we're going to do, we can't be self-contained in America. I mean, maybe we can, I don't know, but probably not. So we'll have to have some trade with others. And as I said, none of this technology is perfect. It's not.
Right.
And I would never make that claim, and I would challenge anybody who did make that claim. But we have to figure out what is the next move, because we know that burning all these fossil fuels is killing the planet. Yeah. We know that, and everything on it. So what's the next generation of answers?
I guess it's just that timeline approach with getting that raw materials, getting to that level of being able to produce at a high capacity for volume and output for the United States in terms of electric vehicles, ceasing all use of conventional cars, things of that nature. How we also can balance that with heavy machinery, planes, trucks, right? All those that really are the large pollutants of the carbon. So that's just that. I'm just looking at it from the balance of, are we being penny wise, pound foolish in that respect? And that's something that I'm also very concerned with policy as a whole, is if so many people are focused on EVs rather than electric planes and electric trucks and those are the real emitters of our pollutants and carbon emissions, and yet we don't hear anything on that. So I guess, and this is more of a longer term discussion, and that's for policymakers naturally. But I just wanted to chat with you about this because you have been absolutely wonderful from beginning to end. I love your knowledge. I appreciate your approach and everything, because your goals, your ideas, they're made from a position of goodness and heart, where ultimately what you want to see this world be in a better position than you left it. And I think that's what I value most about you.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I agree with you, Mike. We still have challenges ahead. No one has all the answers. We're on a road transitioning right now. It's actually fascinating to be part of this. You, me, all of us, we're part of history. We're watching history.
Yeah.
To transition from an oil-based global economy to something else. We've been addicted to oil and fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
And now we're seeing that change. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. It's actually pretty historic to see that. And we're not only seeing the change, we're seeing all the new jobs it's bringing. And we have the colleges on board. We have training centers opening up. We have colleges now teaching classes in engineering for wind and solar and different jobs connected to the component parts of making that. So we're seeing a workforce being developed. We're seeing a new economy around the green energy development. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we're going to see cleaner air. Do we have more to do? Yes. Yes, we do. But, we're taking it, I think, one giant leap at a time. And hopefully we'll make a lot of progress.
One giant green leap at a time.
That's right. I'm going to say that.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and you are wonderful. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you to all listeners, too.